Hello and welcome to the Romance Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z and Morgan Brice. And tonight we're talking about shifters. What makes a good shifter story, what makes a believable shifter story, and why we like our shifter romances. And so I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves. Lynn, take it away.
Hi, I'm Lynn Michaels. I've been writing MM romance for probably over 5 years now. I have a lot of different titles available, and some of them are shifters. So shifters are a ton of fun. So I'm very happy to be here to talk about that.
Awesome. Lissa?
Wow. Sorry, I don't know how to work this thing very well. So I'm Lissa Kasey. I have been writing shifters and publishing shifters for over 11 years, I think, at this point. And I pretty much have delved into everything from dragons to lynx to tigers. I mean, if it's a possible shifter. Well, I haven't done wombats. That might be a new thing I might try. We'll see.
There you go. And I'm, as I said, Gail Z and Morgan Brice. As Gail, I write epic fantasy and urban fantasy. They have some shifters, but not generally on the romantic side. And then as Morgan Brice, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. And my Fox Hollow series definitely has shifters. So let's get the first question out of the way that folks sometimes come up with if they're new to thinking about shifter romance or reading shifter, which is, okay, wait a second. How do you deal with, you have a 160-pound guy who turns into a 300-pound tiger or a, 2-pound hedgehog? How do you deal with that? Lynn, what do you tell people when they ask that?
Well, that is a super question, and there's a lot of different ways to do that, and I've seen it done a lot of ways, but I think, when you're starting to get into shifters, you're starting to get, that fantasy piece of it and magic. So you just I just kind of let the magic do it as they're shifting. That's probably been my primary way of doing it. So my first shifter story I did was a deer. So not a little big elk deer. So they had to pack on a couple hundred pounds when they shifted. So magic was the piece of that.
How about you, Lissa?
I think most of the time I do deal with it as a magic element. I did do with the Hidden Gem series, because it was a mutation in that part of it. We did a little bit more science until we got to the part, spoiler here in case anybody hasn't read that, the end where some of them turn into dragons. The beginning of it, when they were going through like a mutation of this sort of virus, they were actually bulking up in size through muscle regeneration. So it kind of started off as a like a whole body change as opposed to just a magical sort of element. Whereas I've had other shifters, like my old Dominion series, where my main character, is a 140-pound man who turns into a lynx. He's like a 20-pound lynx. So that is completely magic, and he's a witch. So it's very much explained more specifically that it's not a change of body mass so much as of material, like magic material for the most part, as opposed to, some series which are a little bit more scientific. I have seen a few sci-fi series in which the mass is more explained scientifically, that they're mutating based on mass and scientific regeneration, which I do find interesting, but haven't completely explored, just kind of vaguely explored.
There's a running joke in fantasy circles that there are some things that you're just better off not trying to explain, and the rather flippant answer is it's frickin' magic. IFM.
Exactly.
And that kind of saves some, some people can get into it and make a really good scientific argument, and other people kind of get in the weeds and get bogged down, and then you kind of go off track trying you get off the story and into the explanation. And I tend to go more with the IFM side of things. That how does it happen? Well, magic isn't always easy to understand. And then we go on from there, because what we're really here for is, two hot guys falling in love. Come on, we didn't come here for the science lecture. What, I think when people get into the shifter romances, they think of wolves, bears, maybe mountain lions, some of the more common big animals. But I think we've all seen and maybe written some much less frequent animals. What are some of the less obvious shifters that you've written or read, and what caught your fancy about them?
Yeah, I was mentioning earlier, my first shifter story was actually deer, red deer from Scotland. So they're really big animals, but I wanted to do something a little bit different. And the story does have wolves and other shifters as well, even more exotic animals like badgers and different kind of birds. But I wanted to pit the wolves against the deer, so that was where my conflict of the story was coming from. And I haven't seen too many deer, or I don't know, it seems like most of the shifters I read there's a lot of them that are the predators. We want the big alpha males that are the predators. They turn into lions and panthers, and I have some of those too, but not often do we have the prey animals. And I wanted a prey animal that was not completely, it had to have some defense. So these are big animals with antlers and hooves, and they can fight back, and they do. So that's what interested me in that. And that's why I went that way. But I like seeing the ones that you don't normally see, something a little bit different. And I like seeing some of the ones that are really paranormal. You talked about dragons earlier, but my newest one is actually a fire shifter, like a fire elemental shifter.
Ooh, cool.
And I never say exactly what it is. Like I don't say a phoenix or I don't say a firebird, but I kind of go with the firebird, but it's kind of an elemental thing. And so it's kind of different than I've ever read before, but it's been pretty fun. Yeah,
it's pretty cool. Lissa, how about you?
Yeah, one of my first ever novels ever published, and it's actually one of the least popular novels I've ever written, I guess, has a phoenix. So I've always kind of liked the elements of doing something a little bit different. More recently, I ventured into the fox, because it is kind of that border between the prey, and the predator, because it can be depending on, this fox is living among wolves, so therefore he's tiny and kind of has to show his teeth, but it doesn't mean much to a lot of things, so it's the different element. I've read many stories where they've had like regular house cats or regular dogs, and those are more interesting because they've been so, I guess, tamed, and we don't think of them as the big predators, the things that are going out and tearing things apart in the full moon, because that's what we think of a lot of times with traditional shifting, as we think of the full moon and oh, it's all vicious and it's all blood and gore and gross. And I think it could be more than that. I had in this last one I had a stag, a giant stag, and he's part fae. And then in contrast, of course, we have the wolves. I think that seeing more of that, I think, is becoming more common. We've seen like hedgehogs lately. We've seen, there was a series about, like, I think it had a rabbit shifter that I recently read. But I read everything shifter wise. So it's fun to see more of that. I wish we would get more than just the typical, the wolves. But I think it does go back to that whole alpha male thing, which is so funny, because I think you could certainly get a rabbit. I mean, rabbits are fierce little, bears, and they're fast. So they may be a prey animal, but you gotta work to catch a rabbit. So maybe, you know, a rabbit and a wolf, if you want to put it together and have a little fun with it. So there's definitely some different angles that can come from that. And I think we're actually expanding into that. We're seeing a lot more of that in writing, which is amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I do too. The first book in my Fox Hollow series has a wolf and a fox, and that was really fun, matching the characters to have the human side of them have some of the traits of their, you know, animal other half in terms of personality. And so that was a lot of fun. And I find that so far the Shifter series that I'm writing are a little lighter, a little funnier. They're just plain fun to write and hopefully fun to read. But I know some of the ones that I've read, aside from the ones with all the wolves, there was one that had a swan shifter, and they didn't really deal with the mechanics of how the swan shifter and the wolf shifter, you know, are you going to have baby wolves and eggs, or how they kind of glossed over that, which was okay. It's freaking magic. But it was hysterical because at one point the swan gets alarmed when he's in his nesting phase and goes on complete crazed protective swan. And it was a funny scene, but of course, you know, he's defending his children. And so that was a lot of fun. I think one of the other ones that I just loved, because it took a little bit of a different twist, Ile Easton's dog shifters, where if the dog was really close to a human and had sort of Velveteen Rabbit, you know, if you became real, you know, if the human kind of thought of you as a fellow human, then you became human when your, you know, person died. But they kind of had to learn how to be human. And there's one with a police dog who is newly human, and he keeps scratching his ears in the wrong way, keeps doing all these dog. And one of the other shifters has to keep, people don't do that, you're giving it away. And I just thought that was funny because, you know, often the wolves just have it all together. The wolves are always cool. And
except for temper, because the temper is always an issue with wolves. It's always an issue.
But they're always, the wolves are the guys with the muscle cars and the black leather jackets of the shifter world, you know. Right. So it's fun to see some of the others have to figure out how to do this thing. What do you think brings people into shifter romance? It's kind of a niche.
So like it's mostly escapism, I think. I mean, we certainly have been taught through the years, much like the vampires were, you know, the shifters are now the sexy ones, because we have the alpha werewolves with all their big muscles and their teeth, and they're super protective. And, you know, so now we kind of are transcending into the rest of the shifters saying, hey, what if, and, you know, it's not exactly the who is the hottest anymore. It's more of like, who's like the kind of funnest, you know, going into it. If you have a cat shifter who has a fascination with plastic bags, or is, you know, watching bugs on the wall because it's like, hey, I'm hyper focused, which is, you know, kind of what they do in this regard. And they all have kind of personalities. So you're so used to having these pets and these critters that we share our lives with and our families with, that I think it's kind of becoming an extension of that. You know, hey, dogs are known to be loyal. You know, cats are kind of finicky. So we inherently put some of that into our you know, male characters and bring it to life.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. But, you know, I think one of the things that I like about it is my roots are in speculative fiction. Before I started writing MM romance, I did a lot of spec fic. And to me, the shifters feel like that. They, you know, kind of what you just said. What if we did this? What if we did that? What if we changed things around a little bit? What if, you know, we twist it in a different way than you would think? So for me, that's what a lot of the draw for writing it is. You know, and it's fun. It's just fun. And I think that everybody, I think people go through in their childhood of pretend you're a cat and pretend you're a dog, pretend you're a bird, and think about what it would be like. So I think some of that carries over into it as well. And then the final piece of that is, how do these characters overcome whatever animal shifter thing that they have to be together? And I've seen it done where one's a human that's not a shifter and one's a shifter, or they're both shifters. They're different kinds of shifters, like you were mentioning a swan and a wolf together. So it's like, how do they overcome all these things to get together? And that's, and then how do they overcome external forces as well? I like to bring external conflict into my stories. So not only how do they overcome this shifter thing between them, but then whatever conflict from the external. So they have to overcome all of that to make it work and find their happy ever after. So
Yeah,
I
I would definitely agree with that. And I think, from the time we're kids, we hear stories where they have, and I always have to say this word slowly so I don't trip over my own tongue, anthropomorphized the animals. So you've got all these talking animals, and you've got, the three little pigs who go out and build houses and all these things. So we're kind of primed for hearing stories about animals that are some semblance of people, or people who are some semblance of animals. And then the romance piece just kind of takes it, to a different place. In one of the Fox Hollow short stories, Romp, I've got an otter shifter, and he falls in love with a beaver shifter. But one of the difficulties is that otters, which I didn't know until I looked it up, are actually carnivores and beavers are not. So he actually got thrown out of his family because he went vegan. And so he has to convince his intended that he's not going to suddenly get snackish and eat him. And
that's great. That's great. That's like the speculative fiction. What if we have a beaver who goes vegan?
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I'm gonna have to check that one out.
So, that's just fun. But I've learned so much about the animals in writing the shifters, to say, how can I make this as real to the animal, fictionally possible, but still, leave that authorial wiggle for what we're doing here. And that's,
right.
That's part of the fun.
Right. Yeah, I did a series on shifters, and I kind of used the science as how they became shifters. But the main guy is a panther, and his love is a mountain lion. And I did tons of research, and another character in that group was a thylacine, which is an extinct animal. Mm-hmm. So I got to learn about all those animals, what they sounded like, what were their habits, what do they do? They have to climb trees. If panthers climb, so we have to put some of that in there, and that's part of the fun of doing it, is learning more about those animals.
Yeah, I think I just saw a dinosaur shifter series out, which looked like fun. So yeah,
you get to watch a lot of YouTube videos studying animals, like, what is this lynx doing? What is this fox doing? What is this tiger? The weird mannerisms, like how they tilt their head, or, the way they study a particular object before leaping at it, those small things. And people don't realize how much research actually goes into writing a good shifter story. I mean, I see plenty of shifter stories that you're kind of like, wolves don't act like that in real life, and you kind of suspend disbelief so much, but it's so much better if you can go in and say, oh yeah, I've seen them do that in a video sometime. Yeah, I could totally see that, happening. And I can see that person, who happens to be a fox in, their shifted form, but then in human form, they're like, kind of wily and cunning, and they have those, little personality traits that kind of seep through. Because we as humans, as our nature, we go through and we attribute our own personality, our own mannerisms to animals. I mean, that's part of what, personification is. I mean, I started back reading gosh, I think it was Banicula back when I was a little kid. That was my first, animal story with the cat and the dog. They thought the bunny was a vampire, and you think of those things and they were people to you because you're a little kid and you're like, oh, that's a person. They're talking, they're thinking like I am. So then you grow up thinking that way, that you start seeing it in everything. You're like, oh, well, this person's definitely a cat person because they're more of an introvert. They like to just kind of be around people when they want and not when whereas this person's a dog person. They're always in the mix of things. And there's always these little attributes that we kind of add and we don't realize it.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that really amazed me when I was studying foxes was that they can tap into the magnetic energy of the earth to help find their prey. And so that's one reason why they never get lost, but that helps them find their prey. I didn't know that. That was really cool. But I could watch videos all day long of the way foxes jump and then go nose first into the snow, just like an arrow, nose first. And that makes me laugh every time. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the tails, those magnificent tails. And so Liam, my fox shifter, he's just fabulous, because who wouldn't be if you knew you had a tail like that? Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Forget having a fine ass, he has a fine tail too.
I love it.
Now we've mentioned dragons and dinosaurs and swans and all kinds of things. Is there anything that you haven't seen somebody do, or that you think, wow, that's untapped territory? Because I think some of the small ones.
I don't think there's been a lot of serpents that I've seen, not like, I haven't seen a lot of, snakes, regular lizards, we see the dragons because it's the big glorious, like the wolf thing, they're big and they're whatever. Dinosaurs, the same thing, but we don't see the regular lizards like an iguana, we don't see regular things like that. And I live in Arizona, so, lizards are everywhere. So it's kind of like, there's probably like lizard shifters here somewhere. They talk about lizard people, and then a lot of non-mer people. So like if you had, I did have one story that talked about a dolphin shifter. However, we never got to see him as the dolphin shifter. So you don't see any that they're not, they're fish type shifters, but they're not actual mermen or mer people. They're, they don't ever turn into just like a fish. It's more of a, hey, this more exotic thing, which is fine. It's just, it'd be nice to see a little bit more variety, I think, in those areas.
There was a merman, I think it was in one of the Vale Valley books down the line. They've got that lake that never freezes over. And I want to say there was a merman that showed up in one of those books. But you're right, you don't see very many aquatic creatures or lizards, or the really small ones, like we were joking about hedgehogs. And I know there has recently been something with a hedgehog, but were hamsters or mice, yeah. And yet, even Cinderella had people who got turned into mice. So that goes back a ways.
That would be an interesting combination, like a cat and a mouse, to see if how could they work out those differences from prey to predator.
Lynn, anything occur to you that you haven't seen that could be interesting?
Just some of the ones you guys have been mentioning, and now I'm thinking you got me thinking about lizards. And I live in Tampa, Florida, and we have those little common lizards all over the place, and they change colors. And we have tree frogs. The tree frogs are crazy over here. And like that's all in my backyard. And now I'm thinking, what other reptiles could we do? Like turtles, like those big gigantic tortoises that you see, or like the iguanas from Galapagos Islands, the ones that swim. So that would be cool.
Moto dragons.
Yeah. They would be very alpha, the kimono dragon. So just, kind of things like that. I don't see a lot of reptiles, as you were mentioning earlier. I don't see a lot of them, but they could be a lot of fun. Now my brain's like going on, like when we get off of this, I'm going to have to go jot down some ideas for some future books.
I think it was C.S. Poe that did a short story. It's not a whole novel, but it's a short story with penguin shifters. And
oh my God.
And that
a lot of penguins lately.
That was hysterical. And it you could get away with a lot of the stuff in a short story. But it was just so funny because one of them finds an abandoned egg, and so what's he going to do with this abandoned egg? And hijinks ensue. But that one was really cute.
I think Amy Bellows has a penguin series now. That, they're giving each other stones and doing all the cute little penguin things, which is super cute.
I love watching the penguins on those zoo shows. They're adorable.
Well, I did a squirrel shifter story for the Heart to Heart 4 anthology. And that was fun because it was completely done humorously, but this guy falls in love with a human and he's trying to figure out how to approach him. So he keeps bringing him little things like he'll chew off a flower and then bring it to the guy, or bring him a rock. And the guy ends up scared to death because he thinks there's this psycho squirrel stalking him.
That's crazy. I like that.
But, that was, and it turns out that the squirrel saves the day. So there you go. The other thing that you don't see a whole lot of, and it's probably because there aren't a whole lot of them just wandering around in the woods, but I don't think I've ever seen anything with like an elephant shifter or a rhino shifter. I've seen tigers and big cats, but not some of the other ones.
I do have a rhino in my Operation Elevate series. Small part, but he's in there, a rhino. I was thinking that myself because I haven't seen any. Trying to come up with things.
I think they'd be more exclusive to like territories, because you don't see them, running around, big populated metropolises. I mean, a zoo maybe, but that would be kind of a sad romance. Like you have a, elephant shifter who happens to be stuck in a zoo or maybe put himself in a zoo, and, the zoologist or somebody comes along and decides to convince him, hey, you don't need to be here or whatever. That would be interesting, but again, it's one of those things that I think they're not, and you'd have to do more of a situational, hey, we're in the tundras of Africa or something and we've got something going on, who knows. That would definitely be interesting though. I guess maybe in a dystopian type world, maybe they'd be everywhere. That would be interesting.
You talked about being in the zoo, and my brain just did this odd mashup. There was a cartoon when I was a kid called the Hair Bear Bunch, and it was a group of bears that were in a zoo, but they really had they had a door that, they could open on their cage. So really they ran everywhere they went. They just came back because the zookeeper was kind of stupid. And every time he looked, they were in their cage, but they weren't much. And you said that about them getting out of the cage, and all I could see was the Hair Bear Bunch.
Yeah. That's funny. I've seen that. Funny. I was thinking about that movie. I think it's from the 70s, but it was called Cat People, where the woman turned into a panther and she ended up in the zoo.
Usually, in serious movies or in genre movies, it doesn't go well usually for the shifters. No.
That's why I like the romances, because you end up with the happy ever after.
Yeah. Even in True Blood, Alcide didn't get the girl. And I always thought that was a shame.
Well, the books, he didn't get the girl either. He wasn't a great guy. No. So, he didn't really deserve the girl. But the girl didn't really deserve any of the guys either. So.
Think of it now.
Those books were just kind of No, it is definitely a different genre now than it used to be. If you look back to the old paranormal, even prior to just being paranormal romance, a lot of it really didn't end up well for shifters. But now in the past, 15, 20 years, we've really had a shift of, hey, you know, the shifter can come out on top and be like the good guy,
Mhm.
even, you know, if say we had our, you know, Katniss with the whole, you know, Hunger Games type thing. If you put that persona with shifters, nowadays there isn't a happy ending at this point. You know, where it used to be that everybody would just die.
Mhm.
So I think the whole genre is shifting in that direction, which is amazing, because you kind of get tired sometimes of reading the constantly. I always kind of joke about it, you know, saying the instant love between shifters is so funny how it magically works. You know, pretty much only in romance magically works. Instant love, you know, between a hedgehog and a tiger. You know, who knows? You know, this kind of craziness that you expect. You read a story and you say, oh, this is a shifter, it's a mouse, but you know, they randomly meet this, you know, werewolf, and they're magically gonna fall in love and be everything that completes each other, which is, it's kind of funny, but somehow it works.
So
yeah,
the other
fated
thing that,
mate stories.
go ahead.
I was just saying that's like kind of reminds me of like the fated mate stories. Yeah.
Which is sort of a sub niche, you know. Not every shifter story is a fated mates. Some of them are, some of them aren't. I mean, you know. And speaking of you know, niche, kind of can't talk about shifters without at least, you know, driving past the whole idea of MPREG. What, love it, hate it, write it, don't write it? Where are we on that?
That's funny. So I never thought that I would do anything like that, but I kind of did with my with my deer shifters. So I kind of made it where the deer were almost extinct, you know, because the wolves keep attacking them. So in order to try to make their species keep going, they found a way to have the males be able to carry babies too. And it has to do with when they shift, and they have to stay in their deer form the entire time they're pregnant until after they give birth. So I kind of did that. So, but it wasn't, you know, because you get a lot of the omega things with the impreg, and it wasn't that at all. And it had, you know, like a reason for that male shifter to shift into a form where he could actually carry the baby, whatever. So it's a little different, but and I like the impreg ones when it, you know, when it kind of makes sense a little bit. And I have read some really good ones, and then I've had some that I've just like went, it's just too crazy. It's just too crazy. So I think it depends on how it's done. For me.
Yeah. How about you, Lissa?
Well, I'm a pretty big fan of MPREG. You know, I spent a couple years not able to write and just reading, so pretty much all I read during that entire time was MPREG. So I have a pretty good spectrum of, you know, the good versus the bad, and some of them are really, really well done. Other ones, they kind of avoid explaining it at all. And I mean, I don't need the scientific explanation, but I need it to make some sense as to why and how it's functioning. You know, if it has a valid reason, that's perfectly fine. Myself, I have one short story that has an MPREG in it, and it's the mutation story. So it's, you know, the humanity itself is in danger. So the whole of humanity has been mutating to recreate something so it can survive. You know, whereas a lot of the stories you read, a lot of them are shifter stories that they've, you know, and you can hear about it in science that they can change and actually, you know, create a function so they can actually have babies. But I don't like when it's glazed over, you know, when they're like, oh, just magically this person. And you always say about that, you know, it's magic. However, I think there's a little bit more to it than that. It's a little bit more complicated to have a man who doesn't have the right parts, doesn't have the right, you know, hip structure, because, you know, there's no bowl for the baby, to have a child and not have an explanation. You know, it's magic that they've just suddenly got a child. You know, we used to joke at the conventions about ass babies, which, you know,
butt babies,
yeah, which would not be possible. There's no biological function for that. So I do feel like it needs to have some kind of make sense to it. you know, but I still read it, you know, even the bad ones, I read them and I'm like, well, it's a magic baby. Okay. You know, that's fine. You know, and I think it's part because I don't have any kids, so I don't really, it doesn't bother me as much. So, but yeah, I love it. I love it. I think some of them are really stupid and they're cute and that's all it needs to be.
I have 3 kids, and if I could have outsourced that part of it, I would have in a heartbeat. You know? But yeah,
Babies.
it's funny. I've got an MPreg series in my mind, but I'm not going to get to it for a little bit. But it was funny because I was on a road trip back before, you know, the current unpleasantness, and we were all talking. We were on our way to a convention. It was me and a bunch of other writers, and one of those writers is, as his day job, he's a physician. And he had never heard of MPreg, and he was fascinated. And he kept going, but how? How does it work? How could it work? And he's going into all of this. He's getting really into the medical side of things. He finally said, when you get around to doing this series, I'm happy to be a technical consultant. I really want to help you make this work. I got so into it. It was really kind of fun. And then, you know, Lynn brought up that other niche, which is ABO, alpha, beta, omega. Which again, not all shifter stories are, but there's definitely a niche out there. Where are you on ABO?
I like reading it. I like reading it, but I haven't tried it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a, you know, in my stable of stories that I want to do someday, something like that. That's kind of an alternate history, you know, that kind of goes back to, you know, like medieval times type thing that has a little bit of that alpha omega piece, you know, and kind of what Lissa said, you know, like bringing in the whole something's happened and we have to, humanity has to change and evolve in order to survive. Something happened to the women.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got that brewing in the background, so I'm gonna try it eventually, but I haven't written anything like that yet, but I do like reading it.
Mm-hmm.
So even when it's not shift, because some of them are not shifters.
No.
Stories, some of them
Some of the MPreg isn't shifter either.
yeah exactly, and I like reading that. I've read some really good ones recently, so definitely like reading it. So everything that I like reading eventually ends up on the page.
Yes.
That I write. So eventually you'll see that.
Yeah.
Melissa, where do you shake out on?
Well, my best-selling series is an alpha omega series, and
There you go.
I fight tooth and nail to not do traditional because alpha is a fake thing that's not real. I mean, they've debunked it. It's not a thing. It's a made-up concept. Right. So in like the concept that I have fated mates, and there is one who happens to be, he's an alpha because he's the head of the pack. And it's because it's a human, you know, / wolf shifter pack, and the omega just happens to be, you know, he's, you know, an outside influence. And if you look at the old history of omegas weren't attracted to the alphas. The whole concept of the omega was that it was a outside of the pack structure type of title, where it was an independent, able to just do whatever it needed to and didn't have to have the pack as part of it. So I try to, you know, incorporate a lot of that into my alpha omega series, being that these two, yes, they are fated mates. It's not necessarily because they are alpha and omega. They just happen to fall into those roles. So you have, you know, the alpha who's like trying to control the pack and he's trying to make sure everybody's safe. And at the same time, the omega's like, I'm going to go do this. And yeah, it might be dangerous, but I think I'll be okay. You know, and it's kind of that whole structure of anybody can be the alpha because, you know, it's just the person in charge. Whereas the omega is really just the person who's independent and trying to, you know, be who he is. And he's not always making the wisest decisions, you know, but they work because it's a matter of, you know, how well are they tied together and I'm trying to tie them together, not because of, hey, this is the title they have, but hey, here's the personalities they have. And I think that's kind of what works, really well for me. I read a lot of alpha omega type pieces. I think I attribute back to a lot of the het fiction that kind of started the genres. You go back to, the Laurel K. Hamiltons, the Patricia Briggs, the Tanya Huff, you go back to the alpha, the format, and then, the omega or the beta character was always the smart and savvy female, So for our genre, I think it's more of a, instead of it being, hey, she has to be smart and tough and whatever, it has to be more of, hey, we need to be on equal ground. Regardless, doesn't really matter so much the gender, it's we need to be on equal ground, which is, I think, kind of where a lot of the gay romance, romance, paranormal, any of it kind of comes from, is it has to be equal ground, no matter what type of shifter, no matter whether it's alpha, omega. You get those that, the alpha treats the omega like a slave. I mean, yes, if that's a specific genre that you're going for, but if it's your general, hey, alphas are just jerks, it's probably not something I'm going to be reading,
Or as they are often referred to, alpha holes.
Exactly.
I don't know if it's true or not, but there is lore that says that the alpha, beta, omega whole thing came out of fan fiction, and particularly supernatural fan fiction. I don't know if that's true or not.
I think it's been around longer than that.
It may have been.
Yeah.
Of course, it's been at least 15 years. So, I think it's amusing that the first piece of supernatural fan fiction went up within a couple of hours of the very first episode, and it was Slash. Is anybody surprised? I mean, that's how I found
it. Guys, I mean, come on.
That's how I found male romance, was through supernatural fan fiction. And then I just had so much fun with it. I said, I wonder what the published stuff looks like that isn't about fandom. Read several hundred of those and said, oh, this is too much fun. Like you said, if I'm having fun with something, it's going to start getting written. And Morgan Brice was born. So that was actually my first exposure to ABO and MPreg and all of that, was through the lens of supernatural fan fiction. And then I've read hundreds since then. But you always kind of remember where you first discovered a subgenre.
It was manga for me. It was manga for me. Asian. They call it boy love, Shoshone and then yaoi. Yaoi came around. I was actually working as a manager of a bookstore, and we happened to have somebody put it on a table, which I look back now and think, wow, that was really crazy to put this on a table. But it was Kaizuna was the name of the book, and it was extreme. I mean, wrapped in plastic, yaoi. So this was full drawn, man on man. And I was like, what is that? I'm like, I thought I was weird, writing these stories that I didn't think anybody ever wanted to read, so I just kind of write things and put things in the background. And gosh, this was 20 something years ago. I feel really old right now. But you've seen this on the table and you're like, what is this? And this, you go looking and you're like, oh, it's a whole genre. They have these, guys and guys is a thing in Japan. Then you start with anime, and then there's tons of slash for any anime that you can think of that has, whoever in it. There's always tons of slash. So that's kind of where I started. And so, yeah, I was never a big, supernatural fan. I watched like a season and a half, and that was about it. I think they're great people, but they're, the stories were just a little weird. But yeah, going back to anime was where I kind of started.
Yeah, my experience was completely different. I have zero experience with fan fiction or manga or any of that. I have learned about that stuff on my journey, but definitely not where I started. I'm not a huge supernatural fan either. I mean, I started, as I said earlier, I started writing spec fic, and then as going through that, I mean, paranormal and fantasy, and huge Stephen King fan, and just all of that. And then I found this, and I thought, I read Harlequins when I was a kid, so I thought romance. That stuff is disgusting. I ain't reading it, I ain't writing it, nothing. But then I found paranormal romance and a book, I can't even think of the name of it, but it was a female demon and a male angel, and how overcoming the good and evil stuff anyway. And then there was vampires and stuff, and I started getting deeper and deeper into the paranormal romance, and then I got into the Black Dagger Brotherhood.
Yeah, love that series.
And that was all she wrote. And I found different groups online for people who were into it, and like they had people that were acting like the characters from the book and everything, and then and I was like, well, okay, where can I find more of this? I didn't even know it's called MM. I was just like, how do I find more of characters like this with the two guys together? Because that just grabbed me, and I didn't even know why at first, but then I started digging through it and found a mermaid one, and it was fabulous, and then it was just like dig. And then I was reading it obsessively, and then, as I said earlier, whatever I'm reading that I'm liking, it ends up on the page, so I like totally shifted gears of what I was writing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, I had started out writing epic fantasy and urban fantasy that has, about 99% action, and there's a 1%, people get together in it, but that's not really focused. And
I did that too.
My shifters were not the romantic leads. They were heroes, they were secondary characters, sometimes they were bad guys, but there really wasn't a romance wrapped up with them. And so I kind of got a view of shifters that way, of just the pure shifter side without the relationships. But it was when I discovered the male-male romance and started to read that in all of its places that I decided the shifter stuff was pretty cool. So here we are. Well, folks, we are actually at the end of our time. It's been a lot of fun. Let's tell everybody where they can find you and your fabulous books online. Lissa, I've been going around to the right on my screen, so let's start with you this time.
Okay, well, you can find me at my website, lissakasey.com. Most of the time, if you really want to do some interaction, I have daily polls and stuff going on at my Facebook group, and that's Lissa Kasey's Mystical Men. Just search it. Lots of, fantasy art that goes up, and daily polls about random things and snippets of, works that I'm doing right now. So yeah, feel free to stop in. I am on Twitter and Instagram. I don't do a lot of chatting on those though, because I spend most of my time writing. So that's where you can find me.
Cool. How about you, Lynn?
Yep. So you can find me at lynnmichaelswrites.com, or you can search out my Facebook group, Lynn's Looney Bin, and that's spelled Looney. Looney. And that was created by the readers of the group. I mean, I did a big poll and contest and see, what do you want to name this group? So that's what happened. So it's Lynn's Looney Bin. But they're a very interactive bunch. They're a ton of fun. So come and join us. And we do all kinds of different activities and games and polls. I have a poll up now that I put up earlier today that was asking about shifters, because I was out here. So we have that going on, and I often invite other authors to come and post some things in there, and it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. And
those are the best two ways. I mean, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram, but those are really push out modes for me. I don't really do a lot of chatting there. So if you want to interact, it's Lynn's Looney Bin is the best place to go.
I'm at gailzmartin.com and morganbrice.com, and that's BRICE. My reader group is The Worlds of Morgan Brice on Facebook, or the Shadow Alliance for the Gail stuff. And I do also run a Supernatural fan group, Supernatural TFWNC, so Team Free Will, North Carolina. And I do live videos. I'm in there all the time, talking and posting and doing pictures and doing snippets of work in progress. And I love showing pictures of the locations that the books are set in, or some little cool trivia piece, sort of a plot bunny. So that's really where you can find me online. And then in Continual, which is the convention we're doing this panel for. So thank you very, very much for being with us tonight. And thank you folks for watching the panel and being with us yourself. There'll be a lot more paranormal romance here in Continual. See you online.